You're nothing but a burden, Catherine. Your son deserves better than having his pathetic mother clinging to him on his wedding day. The words hit me like ice water as I stood in my simple navy dress, watching my future daughter-in-law adjust her designer gown in the bridal suite mirror. I smiled quietly, knowing that in exactly 3 hours, this woman would discover just how wrong she was about everything. What happened next would shake her to her very core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my son Marcus's wedding dawned gray and drizzly, which seemed fitting given how I felt about the entire affair. I had been dreading this day for months, not because I didn't want my son to be happy, but because I knew exactly what kind of woman he was marrying. Victoria Ashworth had swept into our lives 2 years ago like a perfectly manicured tornado, and from the moment I met her, I recognized the calculating gleam in her emerald eyes. I stood in my modest hotel room at the Grandview Manor, the same venue where Marcus's father and I had celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary before cancer took him 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus had chosen this place for his wedding, though I doubted he remembered the significance. Victoria had probably selected it for its prestige and the hefty price tag that came with booking their premium package. My reflection stared back at me from the antique mirror, and I barely recognized the woman looking back. At 57, I had aged considerably in the past 2 years since Victoria entered our lives. The stress of watching my only child being systematically isolated from me had taken its toll. My once vibrant auburn hair had gone completely silver, and worry lines etched deep grooves around my brown eyes. I looked exactly like what Victoria wanted everyone to see, a lonely widow clinging desperately to her son. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, except my late husband's attorney and the private wealth management firm in Manhattan, was that beneath this carefully maintained facade of middle-class modesty lay something that would have made Victoria's social climbing heart skip several beats. The $50 million trust fund that my husband, David, had established before his death wasn't just a safety net for our family's future. It was a test. David had been a brilliant man, a tech entrepreneur who sold his software company to a major corporation just months before his cancer diagnosis. The sale had made us wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, but David had insisted we keep living our quiet suburban life in our modest 3-bedroom home in Millbrook. He wanted to see who Marcus would become as a man, whether he would choose character over convenience, love over luxury. More importantly, he wanted to see what kind of woman Marcus would choose to spend his life with. The trust came with very specific conditions that David had outlined in excruciating detail. Marcus would gain access to the full amount on his 30th birthday, but only if he demonstrated the values that David held dear: loyalty to family, integrity in relationships, and the wisdom to choose a life partner who loved him for who he was, not what he could provide. If Marcus married someone who showed signs of being motivated by money or status, if he chose someone who tried to drive a wedge between him and me, the trust would be dissolved and donated to charity. David had been worried about exactly this scenario. He had seen too many wealthy families torn apart by gold diggers and fortune hunters. He wanted to protect our son from making a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. At the time, I thought his precautions were excessive, overly paranoid. Marcus was such a good judge of character, so grounded despite our newfound wealth. How could he possibly fall for someone who only wanted him for his money? I had my answer now, and she was currently getting her hair done in the bridal suite 3 floors above me. Victoria had appeared in Marcus's life during his final year at Columbia Business School, where he was studying on a full academic scholarship that he had earned through his own merit, not knowing about the fortune waiting for him. She was completing her master's degree in art history, though I suspected her real education was in identifying and targeting promising young men from wealthy families. She had an uncanny ability to spot potential from across a crowded room. Their courtship had been swift and intense.
Within 3 months of dating, Victoria had moved into Marcus's small studio apartment near campus. Within 6 months, she was planning their entire future together, complete with detailed spreadsheets of career trajectories and lifestyle goals. By their first anniversary, she had begun making subtle comments about me and my role in Marcus's life. It started small, as these things always do. Little observations about how often Marcus called me, gentle suggestions that maybe he relied on me too much for someone his age. She would make jokes about mama boys in front of their friends, then apologize sweetly if anyone pointed out how inappropriate her comments were. She had a gift for making her cruelest remarks sound like loving concern. Gradually, Marcus's weekly calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. Holiday visits were shortened from long weekends to single days, then eventually to brief afternoon stops that left little time for meaningful conversation. Victoria always had somewhere else they needed to be, some obligation that took precedence over family time. She was systematically erasing me from my son's life, and she was doing it so skillfully that Marcus barely noticed what was happening. The engagement announcement came via a text message. Not a phone call, not a visit home to share the news in person, but a casual text with a photo of Victoria's ring, a massive emerald-cut diamond that probably cost more than most people's cars. When I called to congratulate them, Victoria answered Marcus's phone. "Oh, Catherine, how sweet of you to call," she had said in that honey-dipped voice that never fooled me for a second. "Marcus is in the shower, but I can give him a message. We're just so excited to start planning our future together. I hope you understand that we'll be quite busy with wedding preparations over the next few months." The message was clear. Don't expect to be included. And I hadn't been. Not really. I was given the basic details about the venue and the date, asked for my dress size so they could ensure I didn't clash with the wedding party colors, and told that my presence would be appreciated but not required for any of the pre-wedding events. Victoria's mother, Helen Ashworth, had taken charge of all the planning with the efficiency of a military general and the budget of a small corporation. The Ashworth family was old money, the kind of Connecticut aristocracy that traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and measured their worth in generations of accumulated privilege rather than actual liquid assets. They had the mansion in Greenwich, the summer house in the Hamptons, and the kind of social connections that opened doors throughout the Northeast Corridor. What they didn't have, I suspected, was the kind of liquidity that their lifestyle required. I had done my research, quietly and carefully, using the private investigation firm that David's attorney had recommended. The Ashworth family fortune was largely tied up in real estate and investments that had performed poorly over the past decade. They were house rich, but cash poor, maintaining their lifestyle through a combination of credit and social obligations. Victoria's trust fund was modest, enough to maintain appearances, but not enough to support the kind of life she clearly wanted to live. Marcus, with his promising career in technology consulting and his apparent lack of family wealth, must have seemed like the perfect mark. Victoria could marry him, gradually gain control of his earning potential, and use his success to elevate her own social status. She couldn't have known that she was actually positioning herself to marry into one of the largest private fortunes in the state. The wedding preparations had been a masterclass in passive aggression. Victoria had made it clear that my input wasn't needed or wanted, but she had been careful to phrase every exclusion as a kindness. "We didn't want to burden you with all these tedious details, Catherine. You should just relax and enjoy being the mother of the groom."
When I offered to contribute financially to the wedding, she had looked genuinely puzzled. "Oh, that's so generous, but Marcus and my family have everything covered. We wouldn't want you to strain your budget." My budget? If she only knew.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The morning of the wedding, I had received my itinerary for the day, typed up with military precision and delivered to my hotel room. I was expected at the venue at 2 o'clock for photos with the immediate family, which would last exactly 15 minutes. I would then be escorted to my assigned seat in the third row behind Victoria's extended family and college friends. The reception seating chart placed me at table 9, with Marcus's former babysitter and her husband, well away from the head table where I might accidentally intrude on important conversations. As I applied my lipstick and gathered my small purse, I reflected on the conversation I had had with David's attorney, Richard Pemberton, just 3 days earlier. He had called to inform me that the trust conditions were coming into sharp focus and that I would need to make a decision soon about Marcus's future access to his inheritance. "Mrs. Blackwood," Richard had said in his careful, measured tone, "I've been observing the situation as your husband requested, and I have to say that Miss Ashworth appears to be exactly the type of person David was concerned about. Her behavior patterns, her systematic isolation of Marcus from his family, her obvious interest in social climbing and financial security, these are all red flags that David specifically outlined in his instructions." I had listened quietly as Richard detailed his observations. Victoria's spending habits, her family's financial situation, her strategic approach to the relationship. All of it painted a picture of someone who was more interested in what Marcus could provide than who he was as a person. "The decision is yours, of course," Richard had continued. "But if you choose to reveal the existence of the trust, it must be done in a way that clearly demonstrates Ms. Ashworth's true motivations. David wanted there to be no doubt about her character before any final decisions were made about Marcus's inheritance." Now, as I prepared to attend my son's wedding to a woman who had called me worthless just hours earlier, I felt the weight of that decision settling on my shoulders. In my purse was a sealed envelope containing documentation about the trust, along with a letter from David explaining his reasoning and his hopes for Marcus's future. I also carried a small recording device, state-of-the-art technology that Richard had provided, just in case Victoria revealed more of her true nature before the day was over. I had learned to be prepared for anything when it came to Victoria Ashworth. The drive to Grandview Manor took me through the winding roads of Connecticut's countryside, past estates that had housed generations of American aristocracy. The venue itself was a stunning example of Gilded Age architecture, all limestone facades and manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. It was exactly the kind of place that Victoria would choose for her wedding, a setting that announced to the world that she had arrived in the social stratosphere she had always believed she deserved. I arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, as instructed, and was immediately whisked away by Victoria's wedding planner, a severe woman named Constance, who managed events with the efficiency of an air traffic controller. She led me through a series of corridors to a small parlor where Marcus was waiting with Victoria's father, Thomas Ashworth. My son looked devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled and his blue eyes bright with nervous excitement. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine happiness, the first real emotion I had seen from him in months. "Mom, you look beautiful," he said, crossing the room to embrace me. For a moment, it was just the two of us, mother and son, sharing a quiet moment before his life changed forever. "You look just like your father did on our wedding day," I whispered, and I saw his eyes mist slightly at the mention of David. "I wish he could be here," Marcus said quietly. "He is here," I assured him, thinking about the trust document in my purse and the careful plans David had made to protect our son's future. "He's watching over you today." Thomas Ashworth cleared his throat, reminding us that we weren't alone. Victoria's father was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of bearing that came from generations of unquestioned privilege. He had been polite to me during our limited interactions, but there was always a sense that he was looking down from a great height, assessing my worth and finding me lacking. "Catherine, lovely to see you again. I trust your accommodations at the hotel were satisfactory?" "Very comfortable, thank you." I noted how he had managed to remind everyone that I was staying at a hotel rather than being housed with the family at their estate. The photographer arrived to capture our brief family moments, and I stood dutifully behind Marcus while she snapped dozens of photos that probably never saw the inside of a wedding album. I was the obligation, the box to be checked,
The person who had to be included for the sake of appearances, but who would ultimately be forgotten in the narrative of this perfect day. After the photos, Constance appeared again to escort me to my seat in the ceremony space. The great hall at Grandview Manor had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with towers of white roses and hydrangeas, crystal chandeliers casting soft light over silk-draped chairs, and an altar decorated with enough flowers to stock a small greenhouse. The cost of the floral arrangements alone probably exceeded my annual salary from the library where I worked part-time. I took my assigned seat in the third row, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, and watched as Victoria's extensive family and social circle filled the rows in front of me. The guest list was clearly divided into two distinct groups: Victoria's people, who occupied the first several rows and wore the understated luxury that only came from generational wealth, and Marcus's people, who were scattered throughout the back sections and looked slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the occasion. My son's college friends were there, young professionals who had dressed carefully for the occasion, but whose off-the-rack suits and department store dresses marked them as outsiders in this rarefied atmosphere. I recognized a few of Marcus's colleagues from his consulting firm, good people who had supported him throughout his career, but who clearly felt out of place in the setting. What struck me most was how few people were there specifically for Marcus. His side of the guest list was thin, populated mostly by colleagues and acquaintances rather than close friends or family. Victoria had systematically pruned his social circle over the past 2 years, discouraging friendships that didn't serve her purposes and replacing them with connections that advanced her social agenda. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance that Victoria had undoubtedly dreamed of since childhood. The processional music swelled as her bridesmaids glided down the aisle in their dusty rose gowns, each one a carefully chosen representative of Victoria's social network. They were all variations on the same theme: beautiful, well-educated, impeccably connected women who moved through life with the confidence that came from never having to worry about money or status. When Victoria finally appeared at the back of the aisle, she was breathtaking. Her gown was a masterpiece of French couture, probably costing more than most people's cars, with hand-sewn beadwork that caught the light with every step. Her veil had belonged to her grandmother, a family heirloom that connected her to generations of Ashworth brides. She looked every inch the aristocratic princess she had always believed she deserved. But as she walked toward the altar, her eyes scanning the assembled guests with satisfaction, I saw something else in her expression. There was a calculating quality to her gaze, an assessment of who was present and who was watching her triumph. This wasn't just a wedding for Victoria. This was a coronation. Marcus watched his bride approach with obvious adoration, and my heart ached for him. He loved her completely, genuinely, without reservation or calculation. He saw her beauty and her intelligence and her social grace, but he was blind to the ambition that drove her every decision. He had no idea that he was simply a means to an end, a stepping stone in Victoria's climb toward the life she felt she deserved. The ceremony itself was traditional and elegant, conducted by a minister from the Ashworth family's Episcopal Church in Greenwich. Victoria had written her own vows, a carefully crafted speech about partnership and shared dreams that sounded beautiful but felt hollow to my ears. Every word had been chosen for maximum emotional impact, designed to portray her as the perfect wife who would support Marcus's ambitions while pursuing her own passions in art and philanthropy. Marcus's vows were heartfelt and sincere, filled with references to their shared adventures and inside jokes that only they understood. He spoke about feeling complete for the first time in his life, about finding his perfect match in Victoria's intelligence and grace. He promised to love her unconditionally, to support her dreams, and to build a life together that would honor both of their families' legacies. As they exchanged rings, I found myself thinking about David and the wedding we had shared 28 years ago. Our ceremony was simple, held in the small Methodist church where I had grown up, with a reception in the parish hall featuring my mother's homemade cake and a DJ who played music from a collection of CDs. We couldn't afford anything elaborate, but what we had was real. Our love was built on shared values and genuine affection, not on spreadsheets and social climbing. When the minister pronounced Marcus and Victoria husband and wife, the assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers. Victoria beamed as she kissed her husband, and for a moment, I almost believed that maybe I had been wrong about her. Maybe she really did love Marcus. Maybe all my concerns were just the paranoid worries of an overprotective mother who couldn't bear to let go of her only child. Then Victoria's eyes met mine over Marcus's shoulder, and the mask slipped for just an instant.
The look she gave me was pure triumph, cold and calculating and utterly without warmth. She had won. She had claimed her prize. And now she was going to make sure I understood exactly where I stood in the new hierarchy of her life. The receiving line after the ceremony was a carefully orchestrated affair, with Victoria and Marcus positioned to greet their guests in order of importance. I waited my turn behind Victoria's sorority sisters and Marcus's college professors, watching as my son was introduced to person after person that I had never met. These were Victoria's people now, and they would be Marcus's people by extension. When I finally reached the front of the line, Marcus hugged me tightly and whispered that he loved me. Victoria extended her hand for a brief shake, her smile bright and artificial. "Catherine, thank you so much for coming," she said loudly enough for the people around us to hear. "I know how difficult it must be for you to see Marcus starting his own family." The comment was designed to sound caring, while actually emphasizing my status as an outsider, someone whose role in Marcus's life was now diminished. I smiled graciously and congratulated her on the beautiful ceremony, refusing to give her the reaction she was hoping for. The cocktail hour was held in the mansion's library, a wood-paneled room lined with leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. I found myself standing alone near the French doors that led to the terrace, nursing a glass of champagne and watching Victoria work the room like the seasoned socialite she was destined to become. She had changed into a second dress for the reception, a sleek cocktail dress that showed off her figure while remaining appropriately elegant for the occasion. She moved from group to group with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and compliments with the grace of someone born to this life. Her laugh was musical and perfectly modulated, her responses to questions carefully calculated to project exactly the right image. I observed Marcus trailing behind her, introduced to person after person as Victoria's husband rather than as himself. His natural warmth and intelligence were overshadowed by her commanding presence, and I could see him beginning to fade into the background of his own wedding reception. This was Victoria's show, and everyone else was merely part of the supporting cast. "Mrs. Blackwood?" I turned to find a young woman approaching me, someone I didn't recognize from the ceremony. She was pretty in an understated way, with brown hair pulled back in a simple chignon and a navy dress that looked like it had come from a department store rather than a designer boutique. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "I work with Marcus at the consulting firm. I just wanted to introduce myself and tell you how much we all think of your son. He's one of the most genuine people I've ever met." I was touched by her kindness, and we fell into an easy conversation about Marcus's work and his reputation among his colleagues. Sarah painted a picture of my son as someone who was respected and well-liked, someone who went out of his way to help others and who maintained his integrity even in the competitive world of business consulting. "I have to admit," Sarah said quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard, "some of us were surprised by his choice of bride. Victoria is obviously beautiful and accomplished, but she's very different from the kind of person Marcus usually gravitates toward." I was curious about her observation, but before I could ask what she meant, Victoria appeared beside us with the silent grace of a cat. "Sarah, how lovely that you could make it," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. "I'm so glad Marcus's work friends could be here to celebrate with us." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah was a work friend, not someone important enough to warrant Victoria's sustained attention. Sarah seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere and made polite excuses about needing to find her seat for dinner.
After Sarah walked away, Victoria turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I hope you're enjoying yourself, Catherine. I know these kinds of events can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to them. The barb hit its mark, but I maintained my composure. It's a beautiful celebration, Victoria. You've done a wonderful job with all the planning. Well, when you have the resources to do things properly, it makes all the difference. I'm just grateful that Marcus and I are starting our life together with such a strong foundation. Financial security is so important for a marriage, don't you think? I studied her face, noting the way her eyes gleamed when she mentioned financial security. Here was proof of what I had suspected all along. This wasn't about love for Victoria. This was about building the life she wanted, and Marcus was simply the vehicle that would get her there. I think love is the most important foundation for a marriage. Everything else is just window dressing. Victoria's laugh was like tinkling glass. Beautiful, but sharp enough to cut. How quaint. But surely you understand that love doesn't pay the bills or provide the kind of lifestyle that successful people expect. Marcus has such potential, such promising career prospects. With the right guidance, he could achieve amazing things. The right guidance. As if Marcus needed Victoria to manage his success for him, as if he couldn't be trusted to make his own decisions about his career and his future. Marcus has always been quite capable of managing his own affairs, I said mildly. Of course he has, Victoria agreed quickly, but everyone benefits from having a partner who understands the importance of strategic thinking. I've been helping him network with the right people, make connections that will serve him well as he advances in his career. It's amazing how much difference the right introductions can make. She was describing exactly the kind of calculated approach to life that David had worried about. Victoria wasn't interested in supporting Marcus's dreams. She was interested in reshaping them to fit her own agenda. She was already planning his career moves, his social connections, his entire future, all designed to maximize their combined social and financial status. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared beside us, looking slightly frazzled. "There you are," he said to Victoria. "Your mother is looking for you. Something about the seating arrangements for dinner." Victoria's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Even on her wedding day, she couldn't escape her mother's micromanagement. Helen Ashworth was a formidable woman who had orchestrated every detail of the celebration with military precision, and she clearly expected her daughter to remain available for consultation throughout the evening. "I should go handle that," Victoria said, already turning away. "Catherine, I'm sure someone will make sure you find your table."
And with that dismissal, she glided away, leaving Marcus and me alone for the first time since the ceremony. "Mom, I'm sorry," Marcus said immediately. "I know Victoria can seem a little cold sometimes, but she's just nervous about everything being perfect. She's been planning this day for so long, and she wants it to be everything she dreamed of." I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be kind and thoughtful and generous, and I saw how hard he was working to make excuses for his new wife's behavior. He was already learning to smooth over her rough edges, to explain away her calculated cruelty as nervousness or perfectionism. "She seems very focused on making a good impression," I said carefully. "She is," Marcus agreed. "Her family moves in these social circles where image is everything. It's been an adjustment for me, learning to navigate all of that, but Victoria is helping me understand how important it is to present ourselves properly. Present ourselves properly." My son was already speaking in Victoria's language, adopting her values about image and status and social positioning. The Marcus I had raised would never have cared about presenting himself properly. He would have cared about being honest and authentic and true to his own values. "Are you happy?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Of course I'm happy. Why would you ask that?" "You just seem different lately. More serious. More worried about things that never used to matter to you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes following Victoria as she moved through the crowd toward her mother. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "I guess I'm just growing up, Mom, learning that there's more to life than just doing what feels good in the moment.
Victoria has helped me understand that we have responsibilities to each other, to our families, to our community. She's made me more ambitious, more focused on building something meaningful. Building something meaningful. I wondered if Marcus realized that Victoria's definition of meaningful probably had dollar signs attached to it. Your father and I always thought you were pretty meaningful just as you were, I said gently. Marcus smiled, and for a moment I saw a flash of the boy he used to be. I know you did, and I love you for that. But Victoria sees potential in me that I didn't even know was there. She believes I can be more than I ever imagined. Or more than Victoria required him to be in order to meet her expectations for their life together. Before I could pursue the conversation further, the dinner chimes sounded, and guests began moving toward the ballroom where tables were set with crystal and china that probably cost more per place setting than most people spent on their entire wedding reception. I found my assigned table in the back corner of the room, as far from the head table as it was possible to be while still technically being inside the same venue. My table mates were a collection of Marcus's distant relatives and college acquaintances, people who were clearly as confused as I was about why they had been relegated to what was obviously the least important table in the room. The dinner service was impeccable. Course after course of expertly prepared food served by waitstaff who moved with practiced efficiency. The centerpieces were works of art, towering arrangements of white orchids and roses that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything was perfect, elegant, expensive, and utterly without warmth. I watched Victoria throughout the dinner service, noting how she commanded attention even while seated. She was the perfect hostess, gracious and charming and completely in control of every interaction. She laughed at the right moments, asked thoughtful questions of the guests around her, and managed to make everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room while never losing sight of her own position as the center of attention. Marcus seemed content to bask in her reflected glow, playing the role of the devoted husband who was proud to be associated with such an accomplished woman. He could see him watching her with obvious admiration, still somewhat amazed that someone like Victoria had chosen him. If he only knew that she had chosen him very carefully, very strategically, after considerable research into his background and prospects. The speeches began with Marcus's best man, a college friend named David Chen, who had flown in from Seattle for the wedding. David's speech was warm and funny, filled with stories about Marcus's college years and his genuine character. He talked about Marcus's loyalty, his sense of humor, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. He painted a picture of a man who was beloved by his friends for his authenticity and kindness. Victoria's maid of honor, her sister Penelope, gave a much more polished presentation. Her speech was elegant and well-crafted, focusing on Victoria's accomplishments and her bright future as Marcus's wife. She talked about Victoria's intelligence, her refined taste, her ability to elevate everyone around her. It was a beautiful speech, but it felt more like a resume than a testament to friendship. When Marcus stood to thank their guests, his speech was heartfelt and genuine. He talked about feeling grateful for the love and support of everyone in the room, about his excitement for the future he was building with Victoria, about his hope that their marriage would be a source of strength and joy for both of their families. Then, Victoria rose to speak, and the room fell silent with anticipation. Marcus and I are so grateful to all of you for being here to celebrate the special day with us, she began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. When I think about our future together, I'm filled with excitement about all the possibilities that lie ahead. She spoke eloquently about their shared dreams, their commitment to building a life of purpose and meaning, their intention to honor both of their family legacies while creating something new and beautiful together. It was a perfect speech, carefully crafted to hit all the right emotional notes, while revealing absolutely nothing about her true feelings or motivations. But then, as she was concluding her remarks, her eyes found mine across the crowded room. I also want to acknowledge that marriage sometimes means making difficult choices about priorities and loyalties. Marcus and I are committed to putting our relationship first above all other considerations. We believe that a strong marriage requires the courage to leave behind anything or anyone who might hold us back from reaching our full potential. The words hit me like a physical blow. She was talking about me. In front of 200 guests, at her own wedding reception, Victoria was announcing her intention to cut me out of Marcus's life completely. She was declaring war, and she was doing it with a smile. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't just about social status or family dynamics. This was about complete elimination. Victoria didn't just want to minimize my role in Marcus's life, she wanted to erase me entirely. Around me, I could hear the polite applause that followed her speech, but it sounded distant and muffled, as if I were hearing it from underwater. I was dimly aware of people beginning to move around as the dancing portion of the evening began, but I remained frozen in my chair, staring at Victoria as she accepted congratulations and embraces from the guests surrounding her.
She had won, and she wanted me to know it. More than that, she wanted everyone else to know it too. The message had been delivered with surgical precision, couched in language that sounded like wedding sentiment but carried the force of a declaration of war. I reached into my purse with trembling fingers and felt the envelope containing the trust documentation. David had been right to worry. He had seen this coming from the very beginning, and he had given me the tools I needed to protect our son from making the biggest mistake of his life. The question now was whether I would have the courage to use them. The dancing had begun, and I watched from my corner table as Marcus and Victoria glided across the marble floor for their first dance as husband and wife. The orchestra played a waltz that Victoria had undoubtedly chosen for its elegance and sophistication, and they moved together with practiced grace. Marcus led confidently, his business school ballroom dancing lessons clearly paying off, while Victoria followed with the poise of someone who had been attending cotillions since childhood. They looked perfect together, like something out of a magazine spread about society weddings. Victoria's reception dress caught the light beautifully as she spun, her diamond jewelry sparkling under the chandeliers. Marcus gazed down at her with obvious adoration, completely unaware that his new wife had just publicly declared her intention to eliminate his mother from their lives. As other couples joined them on the dance floor, I found myself alone at my table, the other guests having dispersed to mingle or move closer to the action. The isolation felt deliberate, another small cruelty in Victoria's carefully orchestrated campaign to make me feel unwelcome at my own son's wedding. I was contemplating making a quiet exit when a voice beside me said, "Mind if I sit?" I looked up to see an elderly gentleman in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his blue eyes twinkling with intelligence. He appeared to be in his 70s, with the kind of bearing that spoke of old money and older manners. "Please," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. He settled himself with care, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, before turning his attention to me. "I'm Charles Whitmore," he said, extending his hand, "Helen Ashworth's uncle, and you must be Marcus's mother." I shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his greeting. "Catherine Blackwood, it's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure's mine entirely," Charles said, his eyes studying my face with interest. "I've been watching you this evening, and I have to say, you're handling yourself with remarkable grace under what must be rather trying circumstances." His directness caught me off guard. "I'm sorry?" Charles chuckled, a sound full of genuine amusement. "My dear, I've been attending society weddings for more years than I care to count. I know strategic seating when I see it, and I recognize deliberate isolation when it's being practiced. You've been placed as far from the action as possible while still technically being included. And your daughter-in-law has made sure that everyone understands your diminished status." I stared at him, unsure how to respond to such blunt observation from a virtual stranger. "Don't be so shocked,"
Charles continued. The Ashworth family has been playing these games for generations. My niece Helen is a master at social manipulation, and she's clearly passed the skill on to her daughter. What surprises me is how little resistance you're putting up. I'm not sure what you mean, I said carefully. Charles leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Well, either you're genuinely unaware of what's happening here, which seems unlikely given your obvious intelligence, or you're playing a longer game than anyone realizes. I'm curious which it might be. Something in his tone made me study his face more carefully. There was a sharpness in his eyes that suggested he saw more than he let on, and his casual mention of the Ashworth family's manipulation tactics implied that he wasn't entirely in agreement with their methods. You seem very observant for someone who's related to the bride. Oh, my dear, being related to someone doesn't mean you have to approve of their behavior, Charles replied with a laugh. I've watched Helen orchestrate 3 daughters' weddings, each one a masterpiece of social engineering designed to maximize advantage for the family. Victoria's wedding is simply the latest production. His words confirmed what I had suspected about the Ashworth family's approach to marriage. These weren't celebrations of love. They were business transactions designed to consolidate power and resources. Victoria is your great niece, I pointed out. Surely you want what's best for her. Of course I do, Charles agreed. But what's best for Victoria and what Victoria thinks is best for herself are 2 entirely different things. That girl has been raised to believe that her worth is tied to her ability to marry well and maintain social status. She's never learned the value of genuine affection or authentic relationships. I found myself relaxing slightly in the presence of this unexpected ally. Marcus loves her very much. I'm sure he does, and I'm equally sure that she sees his love as a tool to be used, rather than a gift to be treasured. The question is, what you plan to do about it. The directness of his question made me pause. Here was a stranger, a member of Victoria's own family, essentially asking me to reveal my hand. It was either an incredible coincidence or a carefully orchestrated test. I'm not sure what you think I can do, I said carefully. Marcus is an adult. He's made his choice. Charles smiled, but there was sadness in his expression. Yes, he has. But has he made an informed choice? Does he understand what he's really getting into? Does he know what kind of family he's marrying into? Before I can answer, the music changed, and I saw Victoria scanning the room with her eyes. Her gaze landed at our table, and I watched her expression shift from curiosity to concern as she registered Charles's presence beside me. Ah, he murmured, following my gaze. It appears our conversation has been noticed. Victoria won't like seeing us together. I'm somewhat of a black sheep in the family, you see.
I have an unfortunate tendency to speak the truth at inappropriate moments. Victoria was making her way toward us now, her smile bright but her eyes cold. She moved with purpose, clearly intent on interrupting whatever conversation might be taking place between her great-uncle and her new mother-in-law. "Uncle Charles," she said sweetly as she approached our table, "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to. Mother has been looking for you." "Has she?" Charles replied mildly. "How thoughtful of Helen to keep track of my whereabouts. I was just having a delightful conversation with Catherine here. Such an interesting woman." Victoria's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Catherine, I hope Uncle Charles isn't boring you with his stories. He has a tendency to go on about the old days." "On the contrary," I said, meeting her gaze steadily, "he's been quite entertaining. We were just discussing family dynamics and how they shape relationships." The barb hit its mark. Victoria's composure faltered for just a moment before she recovered her poise. "How fascinating," she said,
her voice honey-sweet with underlying steel. "Uncle Charles, would you mind if I borrowed Catherine for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with her privately." It wasn't really a request, and we all knew it. Charles rose from his chair with courtly grace, but not before pressing something small and hard into my palm. "It's been a pleasure, Catherine," he said formally. "I do hope we'll have occasion to continue our conversation soon." After he walked away, Victoria turned to me with a smile that could have cut glass. "Shall we step outside for some air?" she suggested, already moving toward the French doors that led to the terrace. I followed her outside, my heart racing, as I clutched whatever Charles had given me in my closed fist. The terrace was empty, most of the guests preferring the warmth and music of the ballroom to the cool evening air. Victoria walked to the stone railing that overlooked the manor's gardens, her reception dress rustling softly in the breeze. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring out at the perfectly manicured landscape. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. The sweet, artificial tone was gone, replaced by something harder and more honest. "I don't like you, Catherine," she said without turning around. "I never have, and I never will. But I've been trying to be polite about it for Marcus's sake. However, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about expectations." I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "Marcus is my husband now," Victoria went on, finally turning to face me. "That means his primary loyalty is to me, not to you. I know that's difficult for mothers to accept, especially mothers who have been the center of their son's world for so long. But it's reality, and the sooner you accept it, the easier this will be for everyone." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked quietly. Victoria's laugh was cold and musical. "I'm not asking anything, Catherine. I'm telling you how things are going to be. Marcus and I will be building our life together, and that life doesn't include a needy, dependent mother-in-law who expects to be included in every decision and invitation." The cruelty of her words took my breath away, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I've never been needy or dependent, Victoria. I've always encouraged Marcus to be independent." "Have you?" Victoria's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent the last 27 years making yourself indispensable to him. Weekly phone calls, constant check-ins, emotional manipulation disguised as maternal concern. It's textbook codependent behavior, and it stops now." Weekly phone calls, constant check-ins. She was describing the normal relationship between a loving mother and son as if it were some kind of psychological disorder. "Marcus calls me because he wants to," I said firmly. "I've never demanded anything from him." "Oh, please," Victoria scoffed. "You may not demand it outright, but you certainly expect it. And when he doesn't call, you make sure he knows you're hurt. When he makes plans that don't include you, you make him feel guilty. It's subtle, but it's manipulation all the same." Her words stung because there was a tiny grain of truth in them. I had been hurt when Marcus's calls became less frequent. I had felt left out when he made important decisions without consulting me. But I had never used those feelings to manipulate him or make him feel guilty. "I love my son," I said simply. "So do I," Victoria replied, and for the first time since we'd stepped outside, she sounded sincere. "Which is why I'm not going to let you continue to hold him back. Marcus has enormous potential, Catherine. He could be incredibly successful, incredibly influential, incredibly wealthy, but only if he's willing to make the necessary sacrifices." Incredibly wealthy.
There it was, the truth that drove all of Victoria's calculations. She saw Marcus as a path to the kind of wealth and status that her own family had lost over the generations. "What kind of sacrifices?" I asked. Victoria's smile returned, sharp and predatory. "The kind that separate successful people from ordinary people. Sentimental attachments, comfortable routines, relationships that don't serve a purpose beyond emotional comfort." She was talking about me. I was the sentimental attachment that needed to be severed, the comfortable routine that needed to be disrupted, the relationship that served no purpose beyond emotional comfort. Marcus would never agree to cut me out of his life completely, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I wondered if they were true. The son I had known would never do such a thing, but the man I had seen tonight, so eager to please his new wife, so willing to adapt to her social expectations, might be capable of surprising me. He won't have to, Victoria said confidently. I'm not going to demand that he choose between us, Catherine. That would be crude and obvious. Instead, I'm going to make it increasingly difficult for him to maintain a relationship with you. Plans will conflict with your visits. Important events will overlap with family occasions. Gradually, naturally, your presence in his life will diminish until it becomes negligible. The coldness of her strategy was breathtaking. She wasn't going to Marcus with a dramatic ultimatum that might backfire and turn Marcus against her. Instead, she was going to slowly strangle my relationship with my son, making each interaction more difficult until he eventually gave up trying. Why? I asked. Why is it so important to you to remove me from Marcus's life? What threat do I possibly pose to your marriage? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the moonlight. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful, almost philosophical. You represent everything that Marcus was before he met me, she said. You're his connection to a simpler time, a less ambitious version of himself. As long as you're in his life, reminding him of who he used to be, he'll never fully commit to becoming who he needs to be. Who he needs to be, according to Victoria's vision of their future together. And who does he need to be? I asked. Victoria's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Someone worthy of the life I can give him. Someone who understands that success requires sacrifice, that social position demands certain choices, that building a legacy means leaving the past behind. Building a legacy. The irony was almost overwhelming. If Victoria only knew about the $50 million legacy that was already waiting for Marcus, contingent only on his ability to choose wisely. You seem very confident that Marcus will go along with your plans, I observed. I am confident, Victoria replied, because I understand him better than you do, Catherine. I know what motivates him, what he truly wants from life. And what he wants is to feel important, to feel like he's making a difference, to feel like he's building something meaningful. I can give him all of those things. You can only give him comfort and nostalgia. She was wrong about Marcus, fundamentally and completely wrong. But she was so convinced of her own understanding, so certain of her ability to reshape him according to her specifications, that she couldn't see the truth. There's something else, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a note of false sympathy. I know that Marcus sends you money every month, a few $100s to help with your expenses. That's going to stop. The monthly transfers. Marcus had been sending me $300 every month since he graduated from college, insisting that it was his way of paying me back for all the years I had supported him. I had tried to refuse the money, but he had insisted, and eventually I had given in, touched by his desire to help. What Marcus didn't know was that I had never spent a penny of his money. Every transfer went directly into a savings account that I had opened in his name, a small nest egg that I planned to give back to him someday. The gesture meant everything to me, but the money itself was insignificant compared to my own resources. Marcus can do whatever he wants with his money, I said. Yes, he can, Victoria agreed. And what he wants is to focus on building our future together rather than subsidizing your lifestyle. He'll understand that it's time for you to become financially independent. Financially independent. If she only knew. Victoria, I said carefully, what if you're wrong about what Marcus wants? What if he's not interested in the kind of life you're planning for him? Her laugh was sharp and dismissive. Oh, Catherine, you really don't understand men at all, do you? Marcus wants to be successful, to be admired, to be important. Every man does. The only question is whether he has someone in his life who can help him achieve those goals or someone who holds him back from reaching his potential. Someone who holds him back. That was her entire assessment of my role in Marcus's life, the sum total of my 27 years of love and support and sacrifice. I would never hold Marcus back from anything that would make him truly happy. Wouldn't you? Victoria's eyebrows rose in challenge.
What if what makes him happy conflicts with what you want? What if his success requires him to move away from you, to invest his time and energy in relationships that don't include you? Would you really be supportive then, or would you find ways to make him feel guilty for choosing his own happiness over your comfort? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that Victoria was testing me, probing for weaknesses that she could exploit later. She wanted to know how I would react under pressure, what buttons she could push to get the responses she needed. "I want Marcus to be happy," I said firmly, "whatever that means for him. Even if it means accepting that his happiness doesn't require your presence?" The words hit like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my voice steady. Even then, Victoria studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded with what looked like satisfaction. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other. I'm not trying to be cruel, Catherine. I'm simply being realistic about what Marcus needs to succeed in life. He's at a critical point in his career, and the choices he makes now will determine his entire future. I won't let misplaced sentiment interfere with his potential." Misplaced sentiment? That was for a description of a mother's love for her son. "I should get back inside," Victoria said, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the glass doors. "People will be wondering where the bride has disappeared to." She started to walk away, then paused and turned back to me. "Oh, and Catherine, I'd suggest you think carefully about how you want to handle the transition we've discussed. It can be gradual and dignified, or it can be abrupt and unpleasant. The choice is yours, but the outcome will be the same either way." With that final threat, she glided back into the ballroom, leaving me alone on the terrace with the weight of her words pressing down on my shoulders. I looked down at my closed fist and slowly opened it to reveal what Charles Whitmore had given me. It was a business card for a private investigation firm in Manhattan, expensive-looking and discreet. On the back, in elegant handwriting, he had written, "Some battles require better intelligence than the enemy expects. Call them." I stared at the card, understanding the implication. Charles suspected that there was more to Victoria's story than anyone knew, and he was offering me the tools to uncover the truth. The question was whether I was ready to go to war with my son's new wife. A sound from inside the ballroom caught my attention, and I looked through the glass doors to see Marcus scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone. When his eyes found mine through the glass, his face lit up with relief, and he headed toward the terrace. "Mom," he said as he stepped outside. "There you are. I was starting to worry. Is everything okay?" I looked at my son, this man I loved more than my own life, and saw the genuine concern in his eyes. Despite everything Victoria had said, despite all her plans and manipulations, Marcus still cared about me. The question was how long that would last under his wife's subtle but relentless pressure. "Everything's fine," I said, slipping the business card into my purse. "I just needed some air. The ballroom was getting a bit warm." Marcus nodded, accepting my explanation without question. "Victoria said she came out to check on you. She's very thoughtful that way." Very thoughtful. If only he knew what his thoughtful wife had just been discussing with me. "She's certainly direct," I said carefully. "That's one of the things I love about her," Marcus replied, his eyes soft with affection. "She doesn't play games or hint around at things. She's always honest about what she's thinking and feeling." Honest. The irony was almost unbearable. Victoria was many things, but honest wasn't one of them. She was calculating, manipulative, and strategic, but she had convinced Marcus that her directness was a virtue rather than a weapon. "Marcus," I said impulsively,
"Are you happy? Really? Truly happy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Of course I'm happy. It's my wedding day. Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure you're not making this decision because you feel like you should, or because you think it's what's expected of you." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze turning toward the gardens where the path wound between perfectly sculpted hedges. "Mom, do you remember when I was in high school and I wanted to quit the debate team because I was nervous about the state competition?" I nodded, remembering the conversation well. "You told me that the most important decisions in life aren't about avoiding fear or choosing comfort. They're about moving toward the person you want to become, even when it's scary or uncertain." I remember. That's what this feels like. Marrying Victoria, building a life with her. It's scary because it's so different from what I'm used to. But she challenges me to be better, to want more from life than just security and comfort. She sees potential in me that I didn't even know existed.
His words echoed exactly what Victoria had said to me earlier, and I wondered how much of his reasoning was truly his own and how much had been carefully implanted by his wife's subtle influence. "What kind of potential?" I asked. Marcus's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Professional potential? Social potential? The potential to really make a difference in the world. Victoria has connections that could open doors I didn't even know existed. She understands how to navigate the kind of social and business networks that can accelerate a career. With her help, I could accomplish things I never imagined." With her help. Everything came back to Victoria and what she could provide, what she could offer, how she could enhance his prospects. Where was the discussion of what he could offer her, what their emotional connection meant, how they balanced and complemented each other as individuals? "And what does Victoria get out of this partnership?" I asked. Marcus looked surprised by the question. "She gets me. She gets a husband who loves her and wants to build a life with her. Isn't that enough?" The innocence of his response broke my heart. He genuinely believed that his love was enough compensation for everything Victoria was bringing to their marriage. He had no idea that she saw him as a vehicle for her own ambitions, rather than as a partner in the truest sense. "Yes," I said softly. "That should be enough." We stood together in comfortable silence for a few moments, listening to the music drifting out from the ballroom and watching the lights twinkle in the gardens below. I wanted to memorize this moment, this peaceful interaction with my son, because I suspected there wouldn't be many more like it in our future. "I should probably get back inside," Marcus said eventually. "Victoria will be wondering where I disappeared to." Victoria will be wondering. Not the guests, not his friends, but Victoria. Even on his wedding day, his primary concern was managing his wife's expectations and reactions. "Of course," I agreed. "I'll be in shortly." Marcus leaned over and kissed my cheek, a gesture so familiar and comforting that it brought tears to my eyes. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. "I know things are going to be different now, but that will never change." "I love you too," I whispered, watching as he walked back into the ballroom and immediately began scanning the crowd for his wife. I remained on the terrace for several more minutes, gathering my thoughts and my courage. The conversation with Victoria had clarified everything for me. This wasn't just about social dynamics or family adjustment. This was about the systematic destruction of my relationship with my son, carried out with surgical precision by a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her ambitions. The business card in my purse felt like a lifeline, but I wasn't sure I was ready to use it yet. I needed to think carefully about my next moves, to consider all the implications of escalating this conflict. David's trust provided me with powerful leverage, but using it would mean revealing secrets that had been carefully guarded for years. As I finally turned to go back inside, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back at me was tired and sad,
wearing a simple navy dress that marked her as an outsider at this elegant celebration. But there was something else in her expression, something that Victoria had failed to recognize in all her careful calculations. There was steel beneath the softness, strength beneath the apparent vulnerability. I was not the weak, dependent woman that Victoria believed me to be. I was a mother protecting her child, and that made me far more dangerous than anyone realized. The ballroom was in full celebration mode when I returned, with couples spinning across the dance floor and conversation flowing as freely as the champagne. I made my way back to my table, noting that Charles Whitmore was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had accomplished what he came to do by giving me his warning and his gift. Victoria was holding court near the head table, surrounded by her bridesmaids and several well-dressed women who looked like they belonged in the society pages of magazines. She was animated and glowing, clearly in her element as the center of the tension. When she noticed me entering the ballroom, she gave me a brilliant smile and a small wave, as if our conversation on the terrace had been nothing more than a friendly chat between family members. The performance was flawless, and I realized that this was how Victoria would handle everything going forward. In public, she would be the perfect daughter-in-law, gracious and inclusive and appropriately deferential. In private, she would systematically dismantle my relationship with Marcus while maintaining complete, plausible deniability. It was a sophisticated strategy, and it might have worked if she were dealing with an ordinary opponent. Unfortunately for Victoria, she had no idea what kind of resources I had at my disposal or how far I was willing to go to protect my son's future. I spent the remaining hours of the reception observing and listening, paying attention to conversations and interactions that might provide useful intelligence later. I watched Victoria's family dynamics, noting the subtle tensions and power struggles that played out even at such a celebratory event. I observed Marcus's interactions with his new in-laws, seeing how he was already adapting his behavior to fit their expectations. Most importantly, I studied Victoria herself, looking for weaknesses or blind spots that could be exploited if necessary. She was confident, perhaps overconfident, in her ability to control the situation. She had underestimated me completely, assuming that I would accept defeat gracefully and fade quietly from Marcus's life. That assumption would prove to be her biggest mistake. As the evening wound down and guests began to make their departures, I approached Marcus and Victoria to say my goodbyes. They were standing near the entrance of the ballroom, thanking people for coming and accepting final congratulations. "Catherine," Victoria said warmly as I approached, "thank you so much for being here today. It meant the world to Marcus to have his mother present for such an important occasion." The words were perfectly chosen, expressing gratitude while subtly emphasizing that my role was now ceremonial rather than essential. "It was a beautiful celebration," I replied, leaning in to hug Marcus goodbye. "I wish you both every happiness." As I embraced my son, I whispered in his ear, "Remember that you can always call me if you need anything at all." Marcus squeezed me. "Thank you, Mom." Victoria's smile never wavered, but I saw something flicker in her eyes as she processed my parting words to Marcus.
She understood that I was sending a message, letting him know that I wasn't disappearing entirely despite her expectations. "Drive safely," Victoria said as I prepared to leave. "The roads can be tricky at night, especially for someone who's not familiar with the area." Another subtle dig, implying that I was out of my element in their sophisticated world. But there was also something that sounded almost like a warning in her tone, a suggestion that perhaps I should be careful about venturing into territory where I didn't belong. I smiled serenely and assured her that I would be fine, then made my way to the valet stand where my modest sedan waited among the luxury vehicles that belonged to the other guests. The contrast was deliberate and obvious, another reminder of my inferior status in this social hierarchy. As I drove away from Grandview Manor, I found myself thinking about David and the trust he had established to protect our son.
He had anticipated exactly this scenario, a situation where Marcus would be vulnerable to manipulation by someone who saw him as a means to an end, rather than as a person to be loved for his own sake. The question now was how to proceed. I could reveal the trust immediately, showing Marcus exactly what kind of woman he had married by observing Victoria's reaction to the news of his inheritance. But that approach carried risks. If I played that card too early, Victoria might find ways to explain away her behavior or manipulate the situation to her advantage. Alternatively, I could wait and gather more evidence of Victoria's true nature, building a case that would be impossible for Marcus to ignore or rationalize away. Charles Whitmore's business card suggested that there might be information about Victoria that even I didn't know, secrets that could provide the leverage needed to expose her completely. As I pulled into my own driveway an hour later, I made my decision. I would not go quietly into the night as Victoria expected. I would not gracefully accept my diminished role in Marcus's life. Instead, I would fight for my son with every resource at my disposal, using the tools that David had provided and the intelligence that Charles had offered. Victoria Ashworth had declared war on our family. She just didn't realize that she was facing an opponent who was far better armed than she appeared to be. The next phase of this battle would require careful planning and strategic thinking. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I made my move. But when the time came to act, I would be ready. Victoria thought she had won by securing Marcus's ring and his name. But the real prize, the $50 million legacy that represented our family's true power, remained safely beyond her reach, and I intended to keep it that way. 3 weeks after the wedding, I sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Sterling and Associates, the private investigation firm whose card Charles Whitmore had slipped me at the reception. The office occupied an entire floor of a midtown Manhattan building, and everything about it spoke of discretion and competence. The receptionist had been politely professional, the security thorough but unobtrusive, and now I found myself facing a woman who looked more like a college professor than a private investigator. Dr. Elena Vasquez was perhaps 45, with intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wore a conservative black suit and minimal jewelry, projecting an air of quiet authority that I found immediately reassuring. According to the materials I had been given, she held a PhD in psychology and had spent 15 years with the FBI before founding her own firm specializing in what she called relationship intelligence. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Whitmore called to explain the general situation, but I'd like to hear the details from your perspective. What exactly are your concerns about your daughter-in-law? I had rehearsed this conversation during the drive into the city, but sitting in this professional environment, the words felt inadequate. How could I explain the subtle campaign of manipulation I had witnessed without sounding like a paranoid mother-in-law who couldn't accept her son's marriage? Victoria Ashworth married my son Marcus 3 weeks ago, I began carefully. From the beginning, I've had concerns about her motivations and her impact on my relationship with my son. What troubles me most is how systematic her approach seems to be. Dr. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, her expression encouraging but neutral. Can you give me specific examples of behaviors that concern you? Over the next hour, I detailed everything I had observed over the past 2 years. Victoria's gradual isolation of Marcus from his family and longtime friends, her strategic approach to social networking, her obvious focus on status and financial security, her manipulation of family dynamics to position herself as the primary influence in Marcus's life. I described the conversation we had shared on the terrace at the wedding, including her explicit plans to minimize my role in Marcus's future. Dr. Vasquez took notes throughout my recitation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening with the kind of focused attention that made me feel heard and believed. When she finished, she set down her pen and studied me thoughtfully. Mrs. Blackwood, based on what you have described, I believe your concerns are well-founded. The pattern of behaviors you have outlined is consistent with what psychologists call systematic relationship interference, and it's often employed by individuals who view personal relationships as transactional rather than emotional. The clinical terminology was both validating and frightening. To hear my intuitive concerns confirmed by a professional gave them weight and legitimacy, but it also made the threat to Marcus seem more real and urgent. "What can you tell me about Victoria's background?" I asked. "That's where things become interesting," Dr. Vasquez replied, opening a file folder on her desk. "Mr. Whitmore provided us with some preliminary information that suggests Miss Ashworth's history may not be as straightforward as it appears." She pulled out several photographs and documents, spreading them across the desk where I could see them clearly. The first was a college yearbook photo from a small liberal arts school in Ohio showing a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Victoria, but with different coloring and a different name. "This is Veronica Ashley, who attended Kenwood College from 2015 to 2017, Dr. Vasquez explained. "She left during her junior year under circumstances that the administration describes as disciplinary action related to academic dishonesty and inappropriate relationships with faculty members." I stared at the photograph, my mind racing. The bone structure was identical to Victoria's, but the hair was darker and the overall presentation much less polished. This woman looked like Victoria's less sophisticated sister, or perhaps like Victoria herself before she had learned to project wealth and social status. "You think this is Victoria?" I asked. "We think this is who Victoria was before she reinvented herself," Dr. Vasquez replied. After leaving Kenwood College, Veronica Ashley disappeared from official records for approximately 18 months. When she resurfaces, it's as Victoria Ashworth, enrolled at Columbia for graduate school with an apparently seamless academic record and family connections that support her new identity. She showed me additional documents, transcripts that showed the gap in Veronica's education, financial aid records that indicated a family background far more modest than the Ashworth legacy Victoria claimed, and most damning of all, a police report from Ohio detailing allegations of fraud and identity theft that had been filed against Veronica Ashley before she disappeared. The charges were dropped when the complainant, an elderly widow named Dorothy Ashworth, decided not to pursue prosecution.
Vasquez continued. But the details are illuminating. Mrs. Ashworth claimed that Miss Ashley had befriended her, gained access to personal information and family documents, and then used that information to assume aspects of Mrs. Ashworth's deceased granddaughter's identity. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't just married into the Ashworth family. She had stolen their identity, constructed an entire persona based on someone else's life and social connections. The confidence, the social knowledge, the sense of inherited privilege, all of it was an elaborate fiction built on theft and deception. Does the Ashworth family know? I asked. That's where the situation becomes even more complex, Dr. Vasquez replied. Our investigation suggests that several members of the family, particularly Helen Ashworth and her brother Charles, have suspected something was amiss for some time. However, Victoria's execution has been so skillful that they've been unable to prove anything definitively. Charles Whitmore's behavior at the wedding suddenly made perfect sense. His pointed observations about the family's manipulation tactics, his warning about Victoria's true nature, his gift of the business card. All of it had been an attempt to provide me with the tools needed to expose the fraud that his own family had been unable to definitively prove. "Charles Whitmore knows," I said. "That's why he gave me your card." "Mr. Whitmore has been concerned about Victoria's influence on Marcus from the beginning," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "He believes that your son is being set up for systematic financial and emotional exploitation, and he wanted to ensure that someone was looking out for Marcus's interests." She pulled out another set of documents, these ones detailing Victoria's financial situation and spending patterns over the past 2 years. The picture they painted was disturbing. Despite her claims of family wealth, Victoria was carrying significant debt and had been systematically increasing her spending as her relationship with Marcus progressed. She's been positioning herself for a lifestyle that requires substantial financial resources, credit cards, personal loans,
even some questionable investment schemes. She's been living beyond her means in anticipation of gaining access to your son's earning potential. Marcus's earning potential. If Victoria only knew what she was really positioning herself to inherit, she might have been even more aggressive in her manipulation tactics. "There's something else," I said, making a decision that I hoped I wouldn't regret. Something that Victoria doesn't know about Marcus's financial situation. I told Dr. Vasquez about David's trust, explaining the conditions and the timeline that would make Marcus one of the wealthiest young men in the state on his 30th birthday. I watched her expression shift from professional interest to genuine concern as she understood the full scope of what Victoria was unknowingly pursuing. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said quietly, "this changes everything. We're not just talking about a gold digger targeting a successful young professional. We're talking about a sophisticated con artist who has positioned herself to inherit $50 million through identity theft and manipulation." The stark assessment sent chills down my spine. I had known that Victoria was calculating and manipulative, but I hadn't fully grasped the criminal dimensions of her behavior. "What do you recommend?" I asked. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for several moments, clearly weighing options and considering implications. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful and measured. "We need more evidence before we can take definitive action. What we have now is compelling, but not conclusive enough to guarantee success if Victoria decides to fight back. She's clearly intelligent and resourceful, and she's had 2 years to entrench herself in Marcus's life." She outlined a plan that was both methodical and careful. Sterling and Associates would conduct a comprehensive investigation into Victoria's true background, gathering documentation that could definitively prove her identity theft and fraud. Simultaneously, they would monitor her current activities, looking for evidence of ongoing deception or manipulation that could be used to demonstrate her true character to Marcus. "The goal is to present your son with evidence so overwhelming that he cannot rationalize it away or allow Victoria to manipulate him into ignoring it. We need to show him not just that his wife lied about her background, but that she targeted him specifically and systematically for financial exploitation." The investigation would take time, possibly several months, but Dr. Vasquez assured me that they would work as quickly as possible while maintaining the thoroughness necessary to build an airtight case. "In the meantime," she said, "I recommend that you maintain normal contact with Marcus while being very careful not to appear suspicious or hostile toward Victoria. If she realizes that she's being investigated, she might escalate her timeline or take actions that could make the situation more difficult to resolve." I left the meeting with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that my concerns had been validated and that professionals were now working to uncover the truth about Victoria. Apprehension about what that truth might reveal and how Marcus would react when he learned that his wife was not the woman she claimed to be. The drive back to Millbrook gave me time to process everything I had learned and to consider how to proceed. Victoria's systematic deception was far more elaborate than I had imagined, but it also provided clear evidence of her true character and motivations. The question was whether Marcus would be able to accept the truth when it was presented to him, or whether his love for Victoria would blind him to evidence of her deception. Over the following weeks, I made a conscious effort to maintain normal contact with Marcus, while staying alert for any signs that Victoria was implementing her plan to isolate him from me. Her strategy proved to be exactly as subtle and systematic as she had promised. Marcus's weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then sporadic. When I called him, Victoria often answered his phone, explaining sweetly that he was busy with work or social obligations. Invitations to family gatherings that had once been automatic now required advance notice and careful coordination around Victoria's social calendar. Most concerning was the gradual change in Marcus's communication style. His conversations became more formal, more distant, peppered with phrases and concepts that sounded more like Victoria than like him. He talked about strategic networking and optimizing opportunities and building meaningful connections, in a way that suggested he was unconsciously adopting his wife's language and worldview. The monthly financial transfer that Marcus had been sending me stopped without explanation or discussion. When I mentioned it during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, he seemed genuinely surprised that I had noticed. "Oh, Mom, I meant to talk to you about that," he said, his voice carrying a note of embarrassment. "Victoria and I have been working on budgeting for our future, and we realized that I need to be more strategic about my financial commitments. I hope you understand."
I assured him that I understood completely, while privately noting how quickly Victoria had managed to frame his support for his mother as a financial burden rather than a gesture of love and gratitude. But the most disturbing change was in Marcus himself. The warmth and spontaneity that had always characterized our relationship were gradually being replaced by something more careful and calculated. He seemed to be evaluated every conversation, every interaction, through the lens of how it might be perceived or what it might mean for his marriage. During one particularly stilted phone call in early November, I decided to test Victoria's influence directly. "Marcus," I said, "I was thinking about coming to visit for Thanksgiving. It's been so long since we've spent real time together." There was a long pause before he responded. "Mom, that's really sweet, but Victoria and I have already made plans with her family. They have this big traditional gathering at their estate in Greenwich, and it's important for me to be there." Important for him to be there, or important for Victoria that he prioritize her family over his own? "Of course," I said. "What about Christmas? We could start a new tradition, just the three of us." "Let me talk to Victoria about it," Marcus replied, and I heard the words that confirmed my worst fears. Let me talk to Victoria. Not let me check our calendar or let me see what works. My son needed his wife's permission to spend Christmas with his mother. "Actually," I said impulsively, "why don't you both come for Thanksgiving instead? I'd love to host Victoria for a real family holiday." The suggestion seemed to catch Marcus off guard. "I don't know, Mom. Victoria's family is really traditional about holidays, and they've been planning this for months." "I'm sure they'd understand," I pressed gently. "After all, you're part of my family too, and we have our own traditions worth honoring." "I'll mention it to Victoria," Marcus said, but his tone suggested that he had no intention of actually challenging his wife's plans. That conversation crystallized something for me. Victoria's strategy wasn't just working, it was working perfectly. In less than 4 months of marriage, she had successfully repositioned herself as the primary decision-maker in Marcus's life. He was already thinking of her family as his real family, her traditions as the ones that mattered, her approval as the one he needed to seek. 2 days later, Marcus called back with Victoria's response to my Thanksgiving invitation. "Mom, I talked to Victoria about Thanksgiving, and she thinks it would be better if we stick with the original plans this year. She pointed out that her family has been planning this gathering for months, and it would be rude to change our minds at the last minute." "Of course," I said. "I understand completely." But she suggested that maybe we could have lunch together the weekend before Thanksgiving. Victoria thought it would be nice to start a new tradition of pre-holiday visits. A pre-holiday visit, not a holiday celebration, but a consolation prize scheduled at Victoria's convenience and designed to minimize my importance in Marcus's life. "That sounds lovely," I said, swallowing my disappointment. "I'll look forward to it." The lunch took place on a gray November afternoon at a restaurant in Hartford, roughly halfway between Millbrook and the apartment that Marcus and Victoria had rented in New Haven while they looked for a house to buy. I arrived early and chose a table near the window, watching cars pass on the busy street outside while I waited for my son and his wife to arrive. They appeared together exactly on time, Victoria looking elegant in a camel-colored coat, and Marcus seeming slightly nervous in the way he always did when he was managing competing loyalties.
Victoria greeted me with a warm hug and immediate compliments about my appearance, playing the role of the loving daughter-in-law for the benefit of any observers. "Catherine, you look wonderful. I love that color on you. Doesn't she look wonderful, Marcus?" Marcus agreed that I looked wonderful, and we settled into the kind of polite conversation that could have taken place between any three acquaintances making pleasant small talk over lunch. Victoria dominated the discussion, sharing carefully edited highlights from their honeymoon trip to Europe and their ongoing house hunting process, while Marcus contributed supportive comments and admiring glances at his wife. "We're looking at properties in some of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the area," Victoria explained, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Marcus has been so successful at work that we can afford to really invest in our future. The house we're considering in Greenwich is absolutely perfect, with a wonderful garden and plenty of space for entertaining." Greenwich? Victoria was maneuvering them toward a home in her supposed family's territory, further cementing her control over their social environment and ensuring that Marcus would be surrounded by her influences rather than his own. "That sounds expensive," I said mildly. "Oh, Marcus is doing incredibly well financially," Victoria replied with obvious pride. "His consulting work has been so lucrative, and with the connections I've been able to provide through my family, his career prospects are really unlimited." The way she phrased it made it sound like Marcus's success was largely due to her contributions, as if he had been struggling professionally until she came along to provide guidance and connections. I watched my son's face as she spoke, noting how he seemed to accept this characterization of their relationship without question. "That's wonderful," I said. "Marcus has always been very capable." "Oh, absolutely," Victoria agreed quickly. "I just think everyone benefits from having someone who understands how to navigate professional and social networks effectively. Marcus is brilliant, but he's also very modest about promoting himself. I've been helping him see that ambition isn't something to be ashamed of." Helping him see that ambition isn't something to be ashamed of, as if I had raised my son to be ashamed of success rather than to value character over achievement. The conversation continued in this vein throughout lunch, with Victoria subtly portraying herself as the catalyst for all of Marcus's recent success, while positioning me as someone whose influence had been more limiting than supportive. She did it so skillfully that Marcus seemed unaware of the dynamics at play, accepting his wife's narrative as simply an accurate description of their relationship. When we finally said our goodbyes in the restaurant parking lot, Victoria embraced me warmly and expressed hope that we would see each other again soon for Christmas. "I'm so glad we could do this. It's important to maintain family connections, even when everyone is busy building their own lives." Even when everyone is busy building their own lives. The message was clear. This lunch was a courtesy, not a commitment. My role in Marcus's life was now ceremonial, something to be acknowledged periodically, but not allowed to interfere with the real business of his marriage and career. As I drove home alone, I found myself thinking about the investigation that Dr. Vasquez was conducting and wondering how much longer it would take to gather the evidence needed to expose Victoria's deception. Every day that passed allowed her to strengthen her hold on Marcus's life, making it more difficult for him to extricate himself, even when the truth was revealed. My phone rang as I was pulling into my driveway, and I was surprised to see Dr. Vasquez's number on the display. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said when I answered, "I apologize for calling on a Saturday, but I wanted to update you on some significant developments in our investigation." I felt my heart rate accelerate. "What kind of developments?" "We've uncovered additional evidence about Victoria's background that I think you need to know about immediately. Could you come to the office on Monday morning? There are some documents I'd like to show you in person." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, and I suspected that whatever she had discovered was more serious than anything we had discussed previously. "Of course," I said. "Is Marcus in immediate danger?" "Not physical danger," Dr. Vasquez replied carefully, "but the scope of Victoria's deception is considerably larger than we initially understood. I'll explain everything when you come in, but I wanted to give you advance warning that we may need to accelerate our timeline for revealing the truth to your son." After she hung up, I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at my modest home and thinking about the $50 million trust that could change Marcus's life forever. Victoria was positioning herself to inherit that money through fraud and manipulation, and every day that passed brought her closer to success. But more than the money, I was terrified of losing my son entirely. Victoria's systematic campaign to isolate him from me was working exactly as she had planned, and I could see him slipping away with each conversation, each canceled visit, each subtle reframing of our relationship as something burdensome rather than loving. The investigation would provide the evidence needed to expose Victoria's true nature, but I wondered if it would be enough to overcome 2 years of careful manipulation and the powerful influence of physical attraction and emotional dependence. Marcus loved his wife completely, and love often makes people willing to overlook evidence that contradicts their emotional investment. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Whatever Dr. Vasquez had discovered, it would determine the next phase of this battle for my son's future. I just hoped that when the time came to reveal the truth, Marcus would still be capable of hearing it. The war that Victoria had declared at the wedding reception was about to enter a new phase, and the stakes had never been higher. $50 million, my relationship with my son, and Marcus's entire future hung in the balance. I spent the weekend preparing for whatever revelations Monday would bring, knowing that the decisions I made in the coming days would determine whether Victoria's campaign of deception would succeed or whether the truth would finally set my son free. The foundation of Victoria's perfect life was about to be examined very closely, and I suspected that what we found underneath would shake everything she had built to its very core. Monday morning arrived with the kind of December chill that made every breath visible. I sat across from Dr. Vasquez in her office, watching as she arranged a series of documents on the desk between us, with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. The evidence she had gathered painted a picture so disturbing that I struggled to process it all. "The woman your son married is not Victoria Ashworth," Dr. Vasquez said without preamble. "Her real name is Veronica Ashley, and she's been running sophisticated long-term cons for at least 5 years. Marcus isn't her first victim." She showed me photographs and documents that revealed Victoria's previous targets: a wealthy widower in Boston who had nearly transferred his entire estate to her before his adult children intervened, a young tech entrepreneur in San Francisco who had liquidated his startup equity to fund her supposed art gallery venture. Each case followed the same pattern: careful research, strategic positioning, systematic isolation from family and friends, and gradual financial manipulation. "She's what we call a long-game predator," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Unlike typical con artists who work quickly and disappear, she invests years in each relationship, building trust and dependency before making her move. It's far more psychologically sophisticated than simple fraud." The most chilling discovery was a laptop computer that Victoria had abandoned in a storage unit when she left Boston. Dr. Vasquez had obtained it through legal channels, and its contents revealed the calculated nature of Victoria's approach. Spreadsheets tracking potential targets' financial assets, detailed psychological profiles noting vulnerabilities and manipulation strategies, even practice scripts for conversations designed to isolate victims from their support systems. "There's a file specifically about Marcus," Dr. Vasquez said, opening the laptop and navigating to a folder labeled Project Connecticut. "She's been planning this relationship since before they met." I stared at the screen, reading Victoria's clinical analysis of my son's psychology, his family dynamics, his financial potential. She had identified him as an ideal target months before engineering their supposed chance encounter at Columbia. Even their love story was a lie. "She knows about the trust," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean? There are references here to inheritance potential and family wealth indicators. She may not know the exact amount, but she's aware that Marcus comes from money that's been carefully hidden. That's probably why she targeted him specifically. I felt the room spinning slightly as the implications sank in. Victoria hadn't just stumbled into a relationship with Marcus and decided to exploit it. She had identified him as the heir to a fortune and had spent 2 years positioning herself to claim it. What do we do? I asked. Dr. Vasquez closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. We have enough evidence to destroy her credibility completely, but we need to be strategic about how we present it to Marcus. He's emotionally invested in this relationship, and direct confrontation might cause him to defend her rather than see the truth. She outlined a plan that was both elegant and devastating. Rather than presenting Marcus with evidence of Victoria's deception directly, we would create a situation where Victoria would reveal her true nature herself. Dr. Vasquez had identified a weakness in Victoria's psychological profile, her inability to resist a perceived financial opportunity, even when it required abandoning her carefully maintained facade. We're going to tell her about the trust, Dr. Vasquez said. Not Marcus, just
We'll make it seem like you've decided to reveal the inheritance early, perhaps as a wedding gift or a gesture of acceptance. Then we'll watch what she does with that information. The plan terrified me, but I understood its brilliance. If Victoria believed she was about to gain access to $50 million, she would likely abandon the subtle manipulation tactics she had been using and reveal her true priorities. The mask would slip completely, and Marcus would see exactly what kind of woman he had married. 3 days later, I called Victoria directly. "Catherine," she said when she answered, her voice carrying its usual note of carefully modulated warmth. "How lovely to hear from you. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I replied. "Actually, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There's something important I'd like to discuss with you privately." I could hear the curiosity in her voice when she agreed to meet me the next afternoon at a cafe in New Haven. She suggested a place near their apartment, probably calculating that the familiar environment would give her a psychological advantage in whatever conversation we were about to have. The cafe was exactly what I had expected. Upscale but not ostentatious, the kind of place where young professionals met to discuss important matters over artisanal lattes. Victoria arrived precisely on time, looking elegant in a cream-colored wool coat and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. "Catherine," she said, embracing me with apparent warmth, "you look wonderful. I'm so glad you called." We ordered our drinks and settled at a corner table where we could speak privately. Victoria waited patiently while I seemed to gather my courage, playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law who wanted to help with whatever was troubling her mother-in-law. "Victoria," I began carefully, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the wedding, and I realize I owe you an apology." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "An apology? Whatever for?" "I haven't been entirely honest with you about my financial situation," I said, watching her face carefully. "I think I let you believe that I'm struggling financially, and that's not entirely true." Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, curiosity replacing polite concern. "I'm not sure I understand. My late husband was more successful than I've let on. He established a trust fund for Marcus that becomes available when he turns 30. It's quite substantial, actually, $50 million. The change in Victoria's demeanor was instantaneous and shocking. Her careful composure evaporated, replaced by an intensity that made her look like a completely different person. Her eyes brightened with an almost predatory gleam, and I could see her mental wheels spinning as she calculated the implications. "50 million?" she said, her voice barely controlled. "Catherine, that's incredible. Why haven't you told Marcus?" "David wanted it to be a surprise," I lied smoothly. "But watching you and Marcus together, seeing how happy you are, I've been thinking that maybe it's time to reveal the trust early, as a wedding gift, perhaps." Victoria leaned forward in her chair, no longer bothering to maintain her usual reserved posture. When were you thinking of telling him? Soon, I said, but I wanted to discuss it with you first. After all, this will affect your life together significantly. Of course, Victoria said, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. I could practically see her reimagining their future, calculating what $50 million would mean for her lifestyle and social position. There is one thing that concerns me, I continued, delivering the crucial element of Dr. Vasquez's plan. The trust has some conditions attached to it. David was very specific about wanting to ensure that Marcus married for love rather than money. Victoria's attention snapped back to me with laser focus. What kind of conditions? The trust documents are quite detailed. They specify certain behaviors and patterns that would indicate financial motivation rather than genuine love. Victoria was quiet for several moments, clearly struggling to maintain her composure while processing the implications of what I had told her. When she spoke again, her voice was strained with the effort of appearing calm. Catherine, I hope you don't think that I married Marcus for anything other than love. I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that my feelings for your son are completely genuine. The lie came so easily to her that I almost believed she believed it herself, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, the mental gymnastics she was performing to figure out how to position herself as the loving wife while still gaining access to the inheritance. Of course not, I assured her, but you understand my concern. David was very protective of Marcus, and he wanted to be sure that whoever Marcus married would love him for himself, not for what he could provide. Absolutely, Victoria agreed quickly, and I think the fact that Marcus never mentioned any family wealth speaks to his character, doesn't it? I fell in love with him not knowing anything about this trust. Not knowing anything about the trust. Another lie, given what Dr. Vasquez had discovered in her files. Victoria had known about family wealth from the beginning. She just hadn't known the specific amount.
I'm so glad you feel that way, I said, because I was hoping you might help me plan how to reveal this to Marcus. I want it to be special, meaningful. Perhaps you could suggest the right time and place? Victoria's eagerness was barely contained now. I think that's a wonderful idea, Catherine. Marcus would be so touched that you wanted to include me in the planning. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing logistics, with Victoria offering increasingly elaborate suggestions for how to reveal the inheritance. Her mask had slipped so completely that she no longer bothered to hide her excitement about the money. She talked about investment strategies, about the kinds of opportunities such wealth would create, about the lifestyle they would be able to afford. You know, she said at one point, her eyes bright with anticipation, this could be the foundation for something really significant. Marcus has such potential, and with resources like this, he could accomplish amazing things. Amazing things. Like funding Victoria's ambitions and maintaining the lifestyle she felt she deserved. As we prepared to leave, Victoria surprised me by reaching across the table and taking my hand. Catherine, I want you to know how much this means to me. Not just the trust, but the fact that you're including me in this decision. I know we've had our challenges, but I hope this can be a fresh start for our relationship. The performance was flawless, but I could see the truth beneath it now. Victoria was already planning how to use this information, how to position herself to maximize her access to the inheritance, while maintaining plausible deniability about her motivations. I hope so too, I said. Family is so important. That evening, I called Marcus. Mom, he said when he answered, and I could hear music and conversation in the background. How are you? Victoria said you two had coffee today. She seemed really happy about whatever you discussed. Really happy. I could imagine Victoria's excitement as she processed the implications of what she had learned. We had a nice talk. Actually, Marcus, I was wondering if you could come visit this weekend. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Of course, Marcus said. Is everything okay? You sound serious. Everything's fine, I assured him. I just have some family business to discuss, and I'd prefer to do it in person. Should Victoria come too? Actually, I was hoping we could have some one-on-one time first, just mother and son. There was a pause, and I could hear Victoria's voice in the background, asking who was on the phone. Mom, Victoria thinks it might be better if we both came. She doesn't want you to feel like we're keeping secrets from each other. Of course, Victoria wanted to be present. She was probably terrified of what I might reveal to Marcus without her there to manage his reaction. That's thoughtful of her, I said, but this is really something I need to discuss with you privately first. We can certainly include Victoria in future conversations. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear muffled conversation as Marcus discussed my request with his wife. Okay, Marcus said finally, I'll come Saturday morning, but I should probably head back Saturday night. Victoria and I have plans with some friends on Sunday. Saturday night. Victoria wasn't going to let him stay overnight, ensuring minimal time for private conversation and maximum opportunity for her to debrief him afterward. Saturday works perfectly, I said. I'll make lunch. That Saturday morning, I waited in my kitchen with a copy of the trust documents, the evidence Dr. Vasquez had compiled, and a heart full of hope and terror. Everything depended on the next few hours. Either I would save my son from the most sophisticated predator he would ever encounter, or I would lose him forever to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. Marcus arrived exactly at noon, looking handsome but tired. The stress of managing his marriage and career was beginning to show, and I wondered how much of that stress came from constantly trying to meet Victoria's expectations. "Mom," he said, embracing me warmly, "it's so good to see you. I feel like it's been forever since we had real time together." "It has been too long," I agreed, leading him into the living room where I had laid out the documents on the coffee table. Marcus noticed them immediately. "What's all this?" "Sit down, sweetheart," I said gently. "We need to talk about your father's legacy and your future." For the next hour, I told my son everything. About the trust fund that had been waiting for him since his father's death, about the conditions David had established to protect him from exactly the kind of person Victoria had turned out to be, about the investigation that had revealed his wife's true identity and criminal background. I showed him the psychological profiles she had created, the manipulation strategies she had documented, the cold calculation behind every aspect of their relationship. When I finished, Marcus sat staring at the documents scattered across the coffee table, his face pale with shock. "This can't be real," he said finally.
"Victoria loves me. We're building a life together." "Marcus," I said gently, "look at the evidence. Look at her own words in these files. You were a mark, not a love interest." He picked up one of the documents, reading Victoria's clinical assessment of his psychological vulnerabilities. I watched his face as the truth began to penetrate, as the careful edifice of lies she had constructed began to crumble. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew about the money before we met?" "Yes," I said. "She targeted you specifically because of your inheritance potential." Marcus stood up abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the bare winter trees. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "How could I have been so stupid? How could I not have seen it?" "You weren't stupid," I said firmly. "You were targeted by a professional predator who had years of experience manipulating good people. This isn't your fault." He turned back to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "What do I do now? How do I face her knowing all of this?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Vasquez. Subject is attempting to access Marcus's financial accounts online. Moving to phase 2. I showed Marcus the message. "Victoria's true nature is revealing itself right now. She thinks she's about to gain access to $50 million, and she's not waiting for permission." Marcus stared at the message, the final piece of evidence clicking into place. "She's trying to access my accounts?"
Dr. Vasquez has been monitoring her online activity since I told her about the trust. She's been researching investment strategies and attempting to gain access to your financial information. Marcus sank back onto the couch, the weight of Victoria's betrayal finally hitting him completely. She never loved me. Not even a little bit. No, I said gently. She never did. But Marcus, that doesn't diminish your worth or your capacity for love. It just means you were deceived by someone who makes deception her profession. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning how to handle the situation. Marcus would return home and confront Victoria with the evidence, while Dr. Vasquez and I remained available to provide support and additional documentation if needed. That evening, Marcus called to tell me that Victoria had confessed everything when presented with the evidence. Her mask had slipped completely, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. She had tried to negotiate some kind of settlement, claiming that their marriage had provided value to Marcus, even if it was built on deception. She actually asked for money, Marcus said, his voice filled with disgust. Even after admitting that everything was a lie, she still wanted to be paid. The marriage was annulled within 6 weeks, with Victoria signing agreements that prevented her from making any claims on Marcus's assets in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. She disappeared from Connecticut as quickly as she had arrived, probably already researching her next target. Marcus moved back home temporarily while he rebuilt his life and processed the psychological trauma of discovering that his entire marriage had been an elaborate con. The trust that David had established to protect our son had served its purpose, not by being revealed, but by remaining hidden until the threat had passed. Victoria's greed had ultimately been her downfall, causing her to reveal herself when she thought victory was within reach. As for me, I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to fight for someone who doesn't yet realize they need saving. The quiet suburban mother that Victoria had dismissed as worthless had proven to be the most dangerous opponent she had ever faced. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.